Okay guys, now I'm going to show you how to solve quadratic inequalities. So questions may not only ask you to sketch the graph, but also solve a particular quadratic inequality for that function. Okay, so it's always useful to sketch the graph first and then look at the graph to determine the solutions of a particular inequality. So let's look at some questions. So question 5, okay, firstly asks us to find the axis of symmetry. So I hope you're really used to this now. So axis of symmetry, simply use x equals to negative b on 2a, okay. Now b is the coefficient of x, which is 2, a is 1, so it's going to be negative 2 over 2, which is going to be negative 1. So negative 1 is our axis of symmetry. Just plot those in, okay, that's negative 1. Now, find the vertex for part B. The vertex, we found the axis of symmetry in part A, right? Which was x equals to negative 1. So now we're going to find the y coordinate. All we need to do is sub in negative 1 back into the function. So we're going to start off by substituting x equals to negative 1 back into our function, just like this. So y is going to be negative 1 squared plus 2 times negative 1 minus 1. Just simplify it, guys, you should get negative 2, okay? So I don't really worry about you simplifying this. So negative 2, therefore the coordinates of the vertex is going to be negative 1, negative 2. Just plot it in, that will be the vertex. Okay, so I'll label that. That's going to be negative 1, negative 2. So I like to again label as we go. Now, in part C, find the x-intercepts, okay? So what do we do to find the x-intercepts? Simply substitute y equals to 0. Okay, so we have, okay, I'll show you why we have this thing here. You're probably wondering why we're using the quadratic formula. Basically, can we factorize this, guys? Well, the factors of 1 is 1 and 1 only, and we can get 2 if we plus 1 plus 1. So if you go 1 plus 1, but positive 1 times positive 1 is not negative 1. So we can't factorize this, so therefore we rely on the quadratic formula. That's what I'm doing over here to find my x-intercepts. So I use my negative b plus minus b squared minus 4ac, the square root of that, over 2a. Hope you've already memorized that, guys. Now to sub it in. So a is 1, b is 2, c is negative 1, isn't it? Negative b is going to be negative 2, so negative 2 plus or minus root b squared, which is going to be 2 squared, okay, minus 4 times a is 1, c is negative 1, so we have 1 and negative 1. The whole thing over 2a, 2 times a is 1, so 2 times 1. Okay, just simplify it now. You should get something like this. So look, negative 4 times 1 is negative 4, times negative 1 is positive 4, isn't it? 2 squared is 4, so 4 plus 4 is simply 8. Okay, and of course 2 times 1 is simply 2. And guys, I want you to simplify your surds as much as you can. So root 8, if I use my tree thing for those who are still not very good at simplifying surds, draw your tree. 2 times 4 makes 8. 2 times 2 makes 4. So if I draw a pair, circle pairs, this comes outside, and whatever's left over, which is just the 2, goes back inside. So root 8 is simplified to 2 root 2. That's what we have here. Okay, so make sure you practice simplifying surds. Okay, so now that we've got 2 root 2, guys, all we can do is simplify. See how 2 is common factor, so everything becomes 1. So we have simply negative 1 plus or minus 1 root 2, or just root 2. Okay, that's how we got the x-intercepts. So therefore, if I want to put them into coordinates, okay, remember how I like to put x-intercepts as coordinates? Because they are coordinates. So I'm going to go like this. It's going to be negative 1 minus root 2, 0, or negative 1 plus root 2 and 0. Okay, so these are our 2 x-intercepts, which is going to be those 2 points. Okay, so I label them again. Okay, so make sure you use a quadratic formula to find the x-intercepts if you can't factorize, okay? That was question 5c, to find the x-intercepts. Now let's find the y-intercept. Just by all we need to do to find y-intercept, simply sub in x is 0, right? So I'm going to go y equals to 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 1 equals to negative 1. Okay, to simplify that, you should get negative 1. So therefore the coordinates of the y-intercept is 0, -1. Okay, which is just there. That's our y-intercept, so I'm just going to put -1 there, just to label it. Okay, now that we've got the y-intercept, we're going to move on to sketch the graph. So I hope you're good at this now. All we need to do is join up. Okay, join to get the sketch of the graph all through your x-intercepts, y-intercept, and your vertex. Okay, that's my sketch of the graph. So once you've got a perfect graph, now I'm going to move on to F. It says hence, so therefore you've got to look at your graph that we've finally drawn. Solve x squared plus 2x minus 1 is greater than 0. X squared plus 2x minus 1 is the function. This whole thing is y, isn't it? Y is greater than 0. If y is greater than 0, or if that function is greater than 0, it means it's above the x-axis, isn't it? There's anything above the x-axis, these parts of the graph, that make x squared plus 2x minus 1 is greater than 0, isn't it? Alright, but here it's asking us to solve in terms of x, so therefore if we look at the x coordinates, or x values, it should be this part here, because the x coordinates that, or the x values that represent this part of the graph is these x values, and the x values that represent this part of the graph is just these values, isn't it? So therefore, x is less than, this point here is -1 minus root 2, right? So this part, we can write it as x is less than -1 minus root 2, right? Because these are the values on our left-hand side. And this point is -1 plus root 2. So these values on our right-hand side are represented by x is greater than -1 plus root 2. Okay? These two are our solutions for F. Okay, so see how we did that by looking at the graph? So if we didn't have the graph, it is a bit difficult. So make sure you actually draw the graph, even if they don't ask you to sketch it. Okay, so it's a good idea to sketch the graph first. Those two are our solutions for 5F. Okay, hope that makes sense. Let's move on to, so question 5G, this time it says find the range of y for x is between -2 and 0, including those two values as well. Okay, what does this mean? It's asking us to find the range of y within this restriction. Okay, right, what we're going to do is we want to find the range for when this happens. So basically, -2 is 0. -2 is here, and 0 is here, isn't it? So what I want to do is find the corresponding point that is here, and also find the corresponding point of 0, that coordinate there. So how do we do that? We simply start off by substituting x equals to -2 to get the y coordinate of that point, so we get the exact point. Okay, substitute x equals to -2 into that function just like this. So we go -2 squared plus 2 times -2 minus 1. And then to simplify it, guys, you should get -1. Alright? So that point there is going to be like that. Okay, rub this off for you. So it corresponds to the y-intercept, doesn't it? So because the y coordinate is -1. Okay, we'll find that. So now we want to find the corresponding point for when x is 0. Sub in x is 0 into the function, just like this. So y is going to be 0 squared plus 2 times 0 minus 1. And then to simplify this, you should get -1. So here, y is also -1 for x is 0, so it's going to be that point there. Okay, I'll rub this off for you again. It's going to be that point there. And again, see how that point is corresponding with the y-intercept? Okay, so both of these points have y of -1. So we've got those points. Now, the restriction implies just that part of the graph, doesn't it? Because it's between -2 and 0, so it's only representing by this part of the graph, okay? This yellow part. But now what's the question, guys? It's asking us to find the range of y. Range is the values for y, doesn't it? That happen for the particular part of the graph. So for this part of the graph, what are the values that represent that part? is going to be represented by this point, these points. So from this end of that part, end of that yellow part, to the end of this yellow part. So it's basically this part here that represents this whole part of this graph within the y-axis, within the y-values, right? So guys, see how this point is the same point as the y-coordinate of the vertex, isn't it? Because this is the vertex. So this and this corresponds for the y-values. So I'll write this again. I'll write the the coordinates of the vertex again, so you just don't get confused. I'll put it over here. Okay, so I put it beneath the vertex. So therefore, because these have the same y values, this value, the y-coordinate, would also be the y-coordinate of the vertex, which is going to be -2. Okay, so the y-values, or the range for this part of the graph, is between -1 and -2, isn't it? Therefore, if I write it down, it would be x is between -2 and -1. Okay, and also including -2 and -1, because see how it's including -2 and 0 for x? Therefore, these are also included. That's our final solution. Okay, see how this is representing this part of the graph? That's question 5G, and that's it. So see how it was quite easy by looking at the graph, okay, and just trying to interpret it? Yeah? So I hope that helped, and hope that made sense. That's basically the way how you find range of a particular given domain. Alright, so always use graph. So even if they don't actually tell you to sketch the graph first, it's always a good idea to sketch it, because it really, really helps, doesn't it? Okay, so that was question 5. That's the solution for 5G. Okay, let's move on. Question 6. Okay, A. Okay, this time it just tells you to sketch the graph for this function, y equals to x squared minus 4x plus 5. Okay, so we're going to do all the steps in one go. So I'm going to start off by finding my axis of symmetry by using my x equals to -b on 2a formula, like this. Okay, x is going to be negative b, which is -4, on 2a. A is just 1, isn't it? So I just wrote 2, because 2 times 1 is just 2. -4 is +4. +4 divided by 2 is simply 2. So the axis of symmetry is 2. Okay, and that point there, this is x equals to 2. That's the axis of symmetry. Now, let's find the vertex by subbing in 2 back into the function to find the exact coordinates of the vertex. So sub it in, 2 squared minus 4 times 2 plus 5. And that should be simplified down to 1. Therefore, that's the vertex. 2, 1 is the exact coordinate of the vertex. Just plot it in as we go. Okay, so that point there is 2, 1. Alright? Okay, now that we've got that, I want to find my x-intercepts. But, can we factorize this, guys? Well, the factors of 5 is 1 and 5 only. And to get -4, I need +1 minus 5, right? To get to -4. But +1 times -5 is not +5, it's -5. So that does not make sense, does it? So if it doesn't make sense, what do? We use our quadratic formula, don't we? So I'm going to go ahead and use my quadratic formula, -b plus minus root b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Hope you've already memorized it. So I'm going to go -b, so it's going to be -4, which is going to be +4, plus or minus root b squared, so it's going to be -4 squared, which is going to be 16, minus 4ac. So -4 times a is 1, c is 5. So -4 times 1 times 5 is going to be -20, isn't it? Right? So now that I've done that, I'm going to put it over. 2 times a is 1, so it's simply 2, because 2 times 1 is 2. Okay, now guys, have a look at this. This is simplified to root -4, isn't it? Can we square root a negative number, guys? Can we square root a negative value? No, we can't, right? So therefore, this is undefined. So this whole solution is undefined, right? Remember, we can't have negative values inside our square root. I really want to stress this to you guys. So therefore, we have no x-intercepts. All right, we have no x-intercepts since this is undefined. If there's no x-intercepts, what does that mean, guys? It doesn't mean there's no graph, okay? That doesn't always have to be x-intercepts. If it's having no x-intercepts, it could be floating. It may have no, it's maybe not touching the x-axis. It may be just above the axis somewhere, okay? So just because you have no intercepts and that all didn't work out doesn't mean you have to stop, okay? Please just keep going. So now I'm going to find my y-intercept just by subbing in 0 into that function. So this is easy, just sub in 0 into there. You should just get 5 for the y-coordinate. So the coordinate of the y-intercept is simply 0, 5. This part is easy, just sub in x equal to 0. So I hope you're really used to this now. So plot it in. That is the y-intercept, where this point is 5. Okay. And then we've got all that. Let's sketch our curve. That's our curve. Okay, so we have to join the x and y intercepts. We don't have any x-intercepts, so we don't have to worry about that. But we do have to pass through the y-intercept and the vertex. So we just go like this. Okay, and that's it. And see how it's like the graph is above the axes? It's like floating. That's why we don't have any x-intercepts, okay? So that's quite possible, so don't freak out if you don't get any x-intercepts when you use your quadratic formula. Okay, and please remember that we cannot have negative values inside the square root. Okay, please take that in consideration. Okay, we've got the sketch of the graph. So now question 6b tells us, hence solve x squared minus 4x plus 5 is greater than 0. Okay, so x squared minus 4x plus 5, this is y, isn't it? This is y, so for when y is greater than 0, it must be anything that's above the x-axis, isn't it? But look, everything, the whole graph is above the x-axis, so this applies for the whole graph, right? But we're solving for x, so what are the values for x that represent the whole part of the graph, that represent actually the whole graph? It would be anything on the x-axis. See how these graphs move outwards? They're going to keep continuing outwards, but we're still going to include all the parts of the graph because that's all above the x-axis. So the x values that represent the whole part of the graph will be all the x values on the x-axis. So therefore, all real x makes this thing happen. Okay, so all real x would be suitable for this inequality to make sense. Alright, does that make sense? So have a look at the graph. Because everything is above the x-axis, all the values of x make sense. So you would write as all real x. Okay, that was question 6b. C, okay, tells us to find the range of y for x is between 1 and 4 and including 1 and 4. Okay, so again, it tells us to find the range of y within this restriction. So x is 1 and 4, so what I'm going to do, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 4. So I want to find the point that corresponds to x equals to 1 and also the point that corresponds to y equals to 4. Okay, so how do we find that? Well, in order to find those accurate points, we need to find the y coordinates of those that are represented by these values of x, right? So what I'm going to do first is substitute x equals to 1, okay, that one first, to find the y coordinate of that point. Into the function, so I'm just going to go 1 squared minus 4 times 1 plus 5, which will simplify down to 2. Okay, so this point here, oh, I'm pretty not accurate, aren't I? Anyway, that point there is the point that corresponds to x value of 1. Okay, the y coordinate is simply 2. So I'll put 2 over here. Okay. Alright, now I want to find the value that corresponds with the x value of 4, that point there. So substitute x equals to 4 into the function like this. So we have 4 squared minus 4 times 4 plus 5, and this will simplify down to just 5. Okay, that point there, pretty close enough, yeah? Okay, so at that point there is going to be 5, so it corresponds with the y-intercept, right? Okay, so that point, I've already put 5 there, which is same as the y-intercept. So now, what part of the graph make this restriction happen on that graph? That part, isn't it? Just the part from that point onwards up to this point. So this part of the graph represent this restriction, right? But what are we asked to do? Find the range of y. Range is the restrictions of y values, okay? So the y-axis. So see how this yellow line is from this part to the end of this part, isn't it? So therefore the y values that represent this part of the graph is represented by this part of the y values. So from this point, which is the end of the tip of the graph, up to that point only. So from this point up to that point, and including those points because it's equal to. Okay, so this is the y values that represent this whole part of the graph. And guys, I've seen some people just write from this part, from this value up to that value, but it's not just this value here, guys, it's from this, okay? Because see how that's all included? So it's not from that only, it's from this part, okay? From the tip of the graph. Okay? So now guys, can you see that the tip is actually the vertex? So this y coordinate, okay, will correspond to the y coordinate of the vertex, which is 1, isn't it? So this one is 1. So the y values happen from 1 to 5, therefore the range is simply y is between 1 and 5 and also including them. Okay? So y is greater or equal to 1 and less than or equal to 5. That's the solution for question 6C. Okay, that was some quadratic inequalities. Alright, so if you're asked to solve some quadratic inequalities that may ask you to find when the graph is greater than 0, like we did in part B, or when we want to find the range of some restriction. Okay, so see how drawing the graph sketching is really helpful for doing those questions? So even if they don't ask you to sketch it first, guys. I really recommend you sketching. Even though they don't ask you to do it, I want you to sketch because that really helps. See how we can get the exact answer by doing that? Okay, that's question 6. That's question 6C. This is our answer. Okay, and that was solving quadratic inequalities.